All right, so to get started, we're going to take a look at the very basics of creating terrains inside of Houdini. And to start, we're just going to take a look at the shelf toolkit. So if you hit this little plus icon up here, go to shelves and then go down to terrain effects right there. We'll get access to all of these different presets. And these are basically just like pre-set up recipes for creating very basics of terrains. And we're going to take a look at a couple different one of these. To start, if we just go to terrain effects, and then we'll just take a look at something like terrain islands, for example. I'm just going to control click that. And whenever you're creating height field nodes, it's a good idea to be on frame 1. There are some simulations that are happening within the network. So it's good just to kind of start in frame 1 so that you don't get bogged down by being on, say, like frame 200 and having to like wait for the simulation to happen before you actually see anything. So just to kind of show that off, if I hit play on this, what we should start seeing happening here is an erosion effect. That is Houdini simulating the erosion patterns onto this terrain. I'm just going to go ahead and hit stop and jump out of this and just go ahead and delete that. And we can check out another one. So we'll just do terrain canyon, for example. I'll control click that and wait for that to build. These terrain presets and height fields in general inside of Houdini do tend to get really, really heavy. Which I'll explain that a little bit. They're volume based, which doing anything volume based is usually pretty heavy. Great. So feel free to kind of like dive inside of these. These are really, really great ways to learn the ins and outs of them. You can kind of create one and rebuild it. And just by doing that, you can get to know a lot of how this stuff operates. We're going to start by just kind of creating something from scratch, and we'll kind of explain things as we go. So I'm just going to jump out of here and then get rid of that. Hit delete. And then on my, over here, my network view, I'm going to hit tab and type in geo and then hit enter. And we'll just call this our, my first terrain. And I'll go ahead and dive inside of there, hit enter. And if we just hit tab HF, we're going to get all, basically a giant list of all the height field nodes. This is a great way to start just by diving in here. You'll notice that the very first one that comes up is the height field node. So we'll just go ahead and click on that and lay that down. And I'm going to hit space G over my viewport just to frame that. And essentially what we're looking at is we're looking at a node that generates a 2D volume primitive. It has two attributes that it works with primarily, and that's going to be height and the mask. And we'll talk about both of those. This first lesson, we're going to primarily focus on the height, and then in the next lesson, what we're going to do is talk about the masking. So it generates a 2D volume primitive. This is a big reason why height fields or making terrains in Houdini is so fast, but it's also a big reason why it gets so slow. So it is comparatively really, really fast, especially during the simulation. If I do something like hit space 2 in my viewport, basically when you're working with the height field, you're basically working in this like 2D kind of world where it's generating like, so you can think of it as like a 2D image that then displaces the actual geometry, which makes it very, very fast. It is very, very memory intensive because essentially right now, if I go back to my perspective view and hit space 1, if I hit W on my keyboard to toggle between wireframe, you'll notice that this doesn't actually have polygons yet. It's a volume. So super important to know that. So to get started, there's going to be two different nodes that can be used to kind of create a lot of information really, really quickly. That's going to be noise and distort. So noise is going to be like the basics, how you generate your broad strokes, and then distortions how you get your micro details. So if I do tab height field, so just do in tab HF, just like that, HF space, and then we'll do noise. And I'm just going to hit enter and then enter. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in right there. And you'll notice that we're starting to get some information already. If I come down here and kind of break down some of the important settings, the very first one that we'll take a look at is the noise settings, so noise type. So this will dramatically change how this thing's going to look right off the bat. So if we just kind of come through here and play around with a couple of these, you notice that we're going to be getting some very, very, very different results just by choosing the different noise pattern. So if I come down here and if I select something like the Celia, the Whirly, we'll start to get some like really, really interesting shapes that can be used for generating a lot of different types of terrains. So play around with a lot of that. The next up, we have the amplitude and the element size. So element size is going to be a multiplier for how much information do we actually want to see in this. And then if we do something like bring this way, way down, notice things get too sharp. And then amplitude is going to be actually a multiplier for the height of that. I'm going to undo out of both of that. Offset and scale. So scale is going to be individual X, Y, and Z. So we can go in individual, if we want to take that noise type and multiply an X or Y compared to the actual element size, which is going to do all three of them. Offset is going to, if I middle click and just move up right here and move this along, it's going to just move that noise pattern through the actual surface. Another important one is the center noise. So center noise is going to make it so that this noise pattern is being applied based off the origin. If I uncheck that, it'll just kind of make sure that the bottom value is going to be sitting on the origin. So I'm just going to leave that checked as well. So from there, we'll kind of be talking a little bit more about all this stuff as we go. I'm going to check out the distortion node. So if I do tab, height field, and then distort, and then I'm going to do distort by noise right there. So this is where we get into like micro details. But before I like to add micro details to this, what I like to use this node for is kind of getting away. You can see right off the bat, just by plugging that in, it's already looking a lot more natural, a lot more organic. But you can see that these shapes right here, specifically if I disable this, these shapes right here are very, very polygonal, which is not necessarily what we want. So what I like to do with this distortion node is I like to use the amplitude and the element size. So if I make my element size something really, really high, something like 2000, I can then use my amplitude node or my amplitude attitude to really kind of shift these very, very polygonal lines to be something a lot more organic, just like that. And then what we can do is if we do another height field distort, so tab HF, hit space, type in distort by noise right there. I'm going to hit enter and then enter. Then we can use this one to kind of generate a lot of the micro details. Just like that. And I'm just going to leave the default value set here for that one. Great. So moving forward, I'm going to drop in a height field erosion. So this is going to be a big step towards really making this thing feel organic and natural. So if I do tab HF and then do erode, hit space. And again, before I do my erosion, what I'm going to do is just go back to my first frame. If you do this all the way out here and you plug this in, it's going to essentially have to simulate all of that. So I'll just make sure that I'm on my first frame. And I'll go ahead and plug that in. And then preview it. You'll notice that we start to get some colors. What I'm going to do is just go into my visualization tab right here. And then you'll see that we have this visualize option. And what we'll do is compute range. What that's going to do is just grab the min and max value. And essentially that enables us to start to do like colorizations like this. And this is just going to be a preview. This isn't necessarily going to be what we use for the render, but it's a nice way to kind of start to get a feel for how our terrain is actually going to look. Great. So from there, what I'm going to do is just hit play. And you can see the erosion effects starting to take place. And this is where everything really starts to feel a lot more natural. Great. So at this point, say we're at a point where we're like, okay, we're kind of happy with where this is. It's always a good idea to kind of cache this out to disk. That way Houdini doesn't constantly have to cook this stuff. And again, it is very memory intensive. So what I'm going to do is just cache it out the disk. So to do that, what I'm going to do is do tab, and I'm going to do ROP output, ROP geometry output. And this is what we're going to use to cache this out the disk. If I plug that in, and we'll just go ahead and rename this. So we'll call this my first terrain. Enter. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and just do save to disk like that. And Houdini will automatically know where to put that. Just make sure that you have your actual file saved out as well, and it'll automatically know to put it into the hip directory, which is where you saved your file, into the geometry folder, and then it's going to automatically name it based off whatever we have right here. So I'll do tab and type in file, and then go up here, go to my hip directory, go to geo, go to my node that I just made right there, and hit enter and hit play. Hit the visibility icon. So right now you can see no more simulation. It's all cached out the disk. We still have the option to kind of go back to our history right here. And that's all great, but we don't actually have to cook this every single time. If we wanted to kind of come back here and modify this, what I want to show you guys is the layering effects. So I'll just come back up here. I'll go to my first frame, high field distort. If we want to start to do something a little bit more complex, what we can do is take advantage of Houdini's the high field layer node. So what we're going to do is kind of branch off this high field. So if we do high field noise, for example, high field noise, and then go ahead and just plug that in, view that, and say we want to do something like just add a bunch of boulders onto here. I'm just going to do tab HF clip, and that's going to give us our clip node, and we'll plug that in, hit play. And the way this node works, the clip node specifically, the way it works is it essentially allows us to set a min and max value. So if I do min and max, you'll see that it's actually flattening a lot of this geometry, which can give you a lot of control over very, very specific, say you're doing like plateaus or whatever it may be. In this specific example, I'm just going to do the max clip as 0. And I'm going to go back up to my high field noise, and then just set my element size to something really, really small, and then go a lot lower on my high field right there. And then what I can do here, if I want to take this and make this a little bit more concrete, so it's a lot flatter, what I'll do is I'll take that soft clip scale right there and just move that all the way down, and I'll kind of move that to origin. So now we just have all this information being positive, and essentially all of this information right here is just a value of 0. And then if we want to combine these two trees, what we can do is just do a high field, so tab HF, and then do layer. And you can kind of think of this as a merge node if you're coming from like Nuke or even the standard merge node in Houdini, but it allows us to do mathematical operations between these two trees. So if I plug this one in the first one, this one into the second one, go and hit visible. By default, we're not going to really see much because it's going to be set to layer mode replace. And if we come in here, we can actually have a bunch of different operations. We have add, we have subtract, we have difference. I'm just going to leave this on add, and then you can see exactly what it's doing, how it's just taking that. I'm going to reverse these plugs so we can see this a little bit better. If I disable this, you'll notice that to see this a little better, what I'm going to do is take this star out and just do our height layer. That way we're not actually bringing that mask along, and we'll talk about this masking stuff in the next chapter as well. So we'll check out layer. If I disable enable this, you'll now see that, okay, now we're just adding a lot of those boulders on. If we want to come in here and do stuff like noise and bring up the amplitude, you'll see that we're starting to get a lot more randomization. So we have a lot more control this way. And then if I want to bring this down the tree, all I have to do is go back to my first frame, plug that into my erosion, go to my high field erode node, hit play. and then just hang out and wait for it to get to a frame that we like. And I'm just going to hit stop right there for this example, and then go to my first terrain, and then hit save, and then go back up here, and then go back to that. I'm going to do turn off show sequence as one entry, and then just choose my frame 14, which is what we just saved right there. Hit accept, and there we go. So that was a kind of a broad look at just the basics of height field nodes and looking at the height attribute. And then in the next session, what we're going to do is start taking a look at the masking and all the masking attribute and the techniques that come along with that.